speakers are Tess Wilson and Madeline Jarvis. Thank you both for joining us. Tess Wilson is the Community Engagement Coordinator for the National Network of Libraries of Medicine, Middle Atlantic Region, and she is joining us from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Madeline Jarvis is the Adult Information Services Manager at the Marion Public Library in Marion, Iowa. Tess and Madeline began working together as part of the American Library Association's Emerging Leaders Cohort of 2018. Along with other young professionals, they worked on the project Beyond Using the Library, engaging millennials as advocates and civic library leaders. The project was sponsored by United for Libraries, the Association of Library Trustees, Advocates, Friends, and Foundations, a division of the American Library Association. Tess and Madeline have shared the results of their work at several national conferences and in their new book, All Ages Welcome, Recruiting and Retaining Younger Generations for Library Boards, Friends Groups, and Foundations, which was released in June by ALA Editions. And now, without further ado, I will hand it over to Tess and Madeline.
Thank you so much, Becky. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today for our workshop. We're going to use Padlet today so that our information can be a little more interactive, just to give you another avenue for engagement during today's workshop. And you can find that link in the chat. Madeline's going to tell you a little bit more about how Padlet works if you want to engage that way.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tess. So within this Padlet link, you'll see a few discussion questions that Tess and I thought could help kind of frame your mindset as we go into this discussion. Just click right below and you're able to type in comments and even respond to other users in real time. Did we miss a comment or did we miss a question that should be discussed? Feel free to add that to our Padlet by clicking on the plus in the bottom right corner or by responding in chat. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Madeline Jarvis, and I am the programming manager at the Marion Public Library in Marion, Iowa. I also want to mention that thanks to our research in millennial engagement, I've gotten pretty involved in my community. I also serve on the board of advisors for our Main Street district and my undergraduate institution's alumni board. And Tess, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself as well?
Thanks, Madeline. My name is Tess Wilson. Like I said, I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Network of the National Library of Medicine, Middle Atlantic Region. I was motivated by our research to serve on an advisory board for the Pittsburgh Schweitzer Foundation. It is an organization that gives fellowships to graduate students so that they can pursue projects in underserved neighborhoods in our region. But most recently, I was motivated to become a trustee for Achieva, which is a foundation that supports children and adults with disabilities and their families. It's really exciting. I was really excited for us both to share the ways that this research and this project has influenced our own activism and our own advocacy. So we just wanted to share a little bit of that information. We also had the pleasure, like Becky said, of working with two other women, Lynn Bertinelli and Kathy Kaczynski, on this project as well. And you'll see on the right a logo for United for Libraries and one for ALA's Emerging Leaders program. I'm going to get to that in a moment, but for now I'll just say they're the reason our group got to work together, and we're really grateful for both of those avenues. So I'll start with a little background for our work, and Becky gave a good overview of how we got started with this. If you take a look at the headline on the right, it reads, "Millennials are the most likely generation of Americans to use public libraries." So this was published in 2017 by the Pew Research Center. So that is great news. It's really wonderful to know that younger generations are engaging with the public library. However, this raised a question for some library support organizations. If the millennial generation is the largest percentage of library users out of all adult generations, then why are they underrepresented in library advisory and advocacy groups like boards, friends, and foundations? One of the organizations that was curious to examine that gap and really motivated to address it was United for Libraries. They took advantage of the ALA Emerging Leaders program to tackle that question, and in 2018, Lynna, Kathy, Madeline, and I were tasked with that dilemma to look into the disparity between millennial library use and board service. All right, Madeline?
Oops, here I am. Thanks for that. Lots of adventures with the mute button. Um, our original research involved reviews of literature and conference sessions, but most importantly, reaching out and talking to people. We conducted face-to-face and phone interviews and set out an online survey with 866 organizational responses across 41 US states. When we surveyed members of library boards, friends groups, and foundations, over half of our respondents said there wasn't a single millennial in their organization. But that's not intentional. 82% of our respondents said that having a diverse membership was important. Early on in our research, we learned that this topic can lead to decisive discussions. Heatedness of some of these conversations in these early sessions that directed us to change our survey from being explicitly about age to only including one optional question at the end where respondents could report their age. So instead of saying, which generation are you a part of, we simply asked, what is your birth year? We noticed stigma against each generation. So if we were speaking with a baby boomer, we would hear kind of some shame and stigma around, oh, I'm not just a selfish retiree. When we spoke with millennials, we heard, I'm not just a career shark looking for resume fodder. So we wanted to remove as many barriers as possible for honest and accurate information. So instead, we specifically wanted to learn a little bit more about why people joined, what it was like working in their group, the ups and downs. And it was only after the fact that we cross-referenced and compared ages across the generations. And so within our generations, we use the definitions from the Pew Charitable Trust because demographics are changing in the United States. In 2017, millennials surpassed baby boomers as the largest generation in the workforce, and this year will surpass baby boomers as the largest generation, full stop. By 2028, Generation X will also have greater numbers than the boomers. After decades of being the dominant generation, baby boomers are losing this representative ground, and it's time for the library friends groups to focus in on retaining younger generations to better represent our communities and for our own group's longevity. So within this, we wanted to take a look a little bit more at how different generations work together. One of the books we found early in our research was called Sticking Points: How to Get 4 Generations Working Together in the 12 Places They Come Apart. And here's just an example of one of the sticking points that this researcher, Hayden Shaw, found across generations. We want to mention that nobody is right or wrong. We've just had different lived experiences that shape our worldview and how we view organizations, information, and the importance or absence of importance for hierarchy. So when we think about how decisions should be made, traditionalists, so those who were born before baby boomers, might say, okay, the boss's job is to decide, whereas millennials, based on their lived experiences, might say, we'll work through the options, decide together, and then if we cannot, the boss decides. This is really important work because right now, I know at my library, we have 5 generations working side by side. So most of the research out there about generations is focused in on these 4 generations, because if we want to advance to the next slide, we can learn a little bit more about Generation Z. So Gen Z is the newest generation. Pew just announced that they are thinking that this is going to be 1997 to 2016 for birth years, but it's still a little bit in flux. A lot of the research that we're doing about younger members is about younger members for their age in life, not because of their millennial status. If Tess and I would have had this conversation with you 20 years ago, we would have talked about Generation X. If we had this conversation in 10 years, we would have talked a little bit more about Generation Z. So again, this is an emerging generation where there's not a lot of intergenerational literature out there right now, but it's still really important to take a look at. So here's a graphic from the Census Bureau just giving us a hint about what the workforce is growing towards. So I wonder, Tess, why do you think younger generations want to help?
Thank you, Madeline. So going into this project, we had some ideas about why younger generations would want to serve on a board or in a friends group. We thought that perhaps with this generation being new to the workforce, they might use their involvement to network or add to their resume, expand their network within their communities. And that seemed to be a pretty common perception as to why younger generations wanted to help. But ultimately, across generations, our survey respondents got involved with the library for altruistic reasons, similar to those that motivated previous generations to join. So they joined because they wanted to make a difference in their community, because their kids love the library, and because they love the library. Kids are actually a major motivator for volunteering across industries. According to the Corporation for National and Community Service, 39.9% of parents volunteer in the US. So parents of all ages want to be involved in the organizations their children use. But most of all, volunteers tend to seek out organizations that embody a mission that they agree with. More than that, they want to feel like they're contributing to that mission. They want to feel like their time is well spent, that they're adding value to a noble cause. They want to fight the good fight. This may seem obvious, but let's just think for a moment about what that means for a friends group. If our volunteers joined us because our mission spoke to them, or the library's mission spoke to them, let's take a close look at how we embody that mission in our work. We should make sure that service opportunities are not just aligned with our mission, but they're refreshing reminders of why folks volunteered in the first place. So while the generations aren't very different at all when it comes to motivations to serve, as Madeline mentioned, there are some key behavioral and social differences that can create barriers when it comes to volunteering. It's important to note, though, that a lot of these aren't unique to any specific generation. Throughout our research, we realize that so many of the quote-unquote differences we perceive between generations aren't actually unique to the generation itself, but simply to the stage of life that that generation is moving through at the time. So when it comes to careers and volunteering, younger generations are working hard to establish themselves in their fields, which takes time, focus, energy, maybe some network building that isn't necessarily part of that noble cause we talked about earlier. Generations might be similar in a lot of ways, but the workforce is changing. It's far less likely that someone will stay in one job for 10, 20, 30 years. Folks are moving around to seek out other opportunities. Which brings us to the social barriers that exist for some younger generations. If younger generations are moving from place to find work, to raise families, it means that they might not have an established social foundation in their new home. And without this foundation, there might not be a good way in to find out about volunteer opportunities that appeal to them. In addition, younger generations are increasingly secular, which means that there are less church connections to lean on for opportunities. And this was one of the important connections folks noted in our research, was a church connection. As Madeline mentioned, there are also barriers that can arise because of interpersonal differences. So differences in communication styles, leadership methods, and even relationships with technology can lead to a feeling of a lack of support or structure. In addition, there are some hierarchies in politics that play in interest groups that make entry points at the very least really hard to find, and at the worst, invisible. And finally, the role of the library is changing. It's increasingly becoming a hub for community engagement, and in the last few months especially, simultaneously becoming a highly virtual experience. However, sometimes our systems of power can find comfort in the same routine and status quo, despite the changes that are happening around us. So this makes it, once again, hard to find an in. One of the largest barriers we found to service was inconvenient meeting times. The majority of our survey respondents were baby boomers, and many of them joined their organization after retirement. So someone who's new in their career might not be able to take off work on a Monday afternoon, for instance. Changes in careers and families make accepting long-term assignments more challenging. And on the other hand, if you schedule meetings or activities after normal work hours, you're asking members to take time away from their families. So there's no perfect solution, but a little flexibility and perhaps alternating when and where meetings are held can alleviate some of that stress. And that also includes virtual meetings. So thinking about the methods that those virtual meetings are held, the platforms, this is all really important to consider when we're thinking about flexibility. You also want to be sure that you're making the time commitment worth it. We received a lot of comments about inefficient meetings. So we want to think, is everyone prepared going into the meeting so that we can focus on action items? Are there perhaps tasks that could be completed between meetings to save time? A lack of diversity increases the pressure of tokenizing, which is a huge barrier we encountered in our research. We really want to avoid what we call the prized poodle effect. A recruit really should never simply be a way to check a box in your demographics. So ask yourself, at your meetings, is everyone allowed to contribute? Is everyone being taken seriously? We can't just recruit one millennial or one person of a younger generation to our friends group and say that the generational diversity problem has been fixed. We got a comment at one of our presentations from someone who felt really patronized by other members of her organization because of her age. So you won't be able to retain younger members if they feel like their time is being wasted, if they feel like they're not being heard. And when we're recruiting, we need to be good listeners and really adapt our methods to accommodate that. There are a couple things to keep in mind as we approach recruitment with this in mind. People are multidimensional and complicated. When we reduce folks to one box based on demographics, we really make them into a persona, which is unfair to this complex individual, but also to our board, because we've just cheated ourselves out of engaging with a human as a whole and enriching our board on a lot of levels. So everyone should understand their individual role and contribution to the friends group. As you'll see on this slide, one millennial noted that in this case, it was a library board, wanted her because of her because they needed help with social media and they perceived that she would be the expert. She might not be, she may be, but we hope that she would be included in these conversations and her service would be welcomed for things beyond simply posting to Facebook. So ask these questions when you're recruiting. Why is this person specifically being recruited? Why are they here? And what is it that they, the individual, not the persona, have to contribute to the conversation? These are really important questions for you to ask because your recruits are definitely asking them of themselves. Another great way to ensure that all voices are being genuinely expressed and heard is to create sort of a feedback cycle so that you're ensuring that new perspectives are heard. Give your newest members a chance to lead a meeting, open the floor to new ideas. And remember that this is all easier said than done. And ask for new members to present their perspectives will definitely be met with crickets if your group has not created and maintained a welcoming, nurturing environment. This is a continuing process. One great way to engage with individuals instead of personas is to send individual emails explaining why they are being recruited. On the next slide is just an example of an email I got from a colleague who I served on a steering committee with years ago. But he reached out actually to ask if I was interested in serving on a board that I'm currently serving on, so it worked. But I just wanted to point out this email because it really made me feel special and made me feel like I could have a voice and really make an impact in this group. So I just wanted to share that example of making sure that everyone knows their role and knows why they specifically are being recruited. And finally, as I mentioned before, one of our biggie barriers is that no one told folks about the opportunity. If someone without any pre-existing connections wanted to get involved with your group, think about how they'd go about doing so. Put yourself in the shoes of a young person who wants to volunteer for a friends group and ask these questions. How do I apply? How does that process go? Who decides if I'm in? What role would I fill? What kind of commitment am I looking at? Who else is in this group? How long have they served? What does this group actually do? If you put yourself in their shoes and these questions are hard to answer, that's good to know because that could be a barrier to volunteering. The harder those questions are to answer, the less likely this future friend is to help out, to volunteer. So make sure your process is clear and your mission is clear. Finally, think about where and how you're recruiting. Do you generally tend to recruit during the same time of year? Do you recruit using the same methods? Shake it up a little bit. mention volunteer opportunities at a story time, think outside the box when it comes to fundraising events. Could they be used as recruiting events? Madeline's going to help us think a little bit more about this and where we might run into these younger generations.
Thanks so much, Tess, and thank you for sharing that example of the form email, of the letter you had gotten that wasn't a form email, excuse me. We just got a comment in our Padlet that somebody had heard about their current board engagement opportunity directly and was asked directly. And I love this because not only does it let somebody know about that engagement opportunity, but it's also so flattering to say, out of all my connections, you are the right one for the job. So I think we're all in agreeing that it is important to have volunteers of all ages within your organization, but where are these folks? So just a heads up, in the state of New York, the average age is 39. So as we discussed, young is subjective, and this is just one facet of representation. But let's take a look at some brainstorms about how we can engage with younger volunteers. When you're advertising not only meetings, but also opportunities, think about in person, where are young parents gathering? Tess mentioned story time, and I loved this idea because not only does this provide an option to reach out to potential volunteers, but it also makes the library staff your biggest advocates as well. If you mention the Friends of the Library organization to my staff, for example, the first thing they're going to come up with is, what has our Friends group done? The Friends group is what gave us the money for our Wi-Fi hotspots. The Friends group raised money for Dolly Parton Imagination Library, so every kid in the community under the age of 5 can get a book. Reach out to the library staff that you've helped before with specific projects. If you've helped with STEAM kits, a butterfly garden, specific events or ins at partnerships, just so that they can also advocate for you within the library spaces. Staff have a great idea about who's in the library, who's in the community, and who can continue to help you be a better advocate. Socially, also reach out to groups such as young professional groups. If you have specific opportunities for task forces as opposed to just a board opportunity, why not see if your local Rotary Club or if your Chamber of Commerce has just the right person or group of people in mind for service projects. And of course, we can't forget to look online. Maybe advertise your meetings, your programs, or your opportunities on platforms like Eventbrite, Meetup, or LinkedIn. How do you want to engage with folks? And think about from there where you might find them. And so as we're thinking about ways to reach out to folks, what do we want them to do? If we want them to get involved, it's important that our potential volunteers know what these expectations are. We would really recommend having written job descriptions for your friends' volunteer and board positions. We'd say to pay attention to these basic skill sets that you might find in a job description, and maybe hop on LinkedIn and see what are trending in specific areas. Do you need somebody who can just show up on a Tuesday morning? You're going to get just a body. But if you think critically and say, what we need is somebody to plan our book sale, ask for somebody with event planning experience, with fundraising, or with project management skills. And then instead of just that persona, you're going to get that full rounded person. But it's okay if they don't have this. Provide one-on-one training, and this is a nice opportunity too if somebody is looking for a way to improve themselves professionally and personally. If I reach out to you and say, I've never planned an event, but this is something I might be interested in, just let folks know what that expectations are. Think about what are the tasks, the frequency of these tasks, and these impacts. So if I say that I want to organize your book sale, does this mean I have to spend 40 hours a week on it? Or does this mean 4 times a year I need to sort and spend about 2 hours a week on this? Be honest with your staff and with yourselves about what this investment is going to look like. And something I like to do, because I know I tend to make things a little complicated, if you're coming up with a job description for the first time, think about how you would explain it to a 5-year-old. Why do you choose to get involved with your friend's organization? Because you like to help? Because you like to have fun? Because you get to help the library do cool stuff? Start from there, and then you can always make things more complicated later. It's also important to have an online application. So when we have applications, you're able to have the same information in the same place. And if you have a dedicated volunteer coordinator to handle the applications. It's nice because you can have that one point person for follow-up, for any questions folks might have about this investment in their time, and just to learn more about your organization. So what we would really recommend is to have applications online, and this does not have to be something complicated. You don't have to be a tech genius to figure this out. Tess and I use Google Forms a lot in our research, and it's pretty drag and drop. What we would also recommend is test out this online application on your phone. A lot of folks have used their smartphones as their primary internet device. I'm looking at some statistics from Pew, and it looks like about 92% of smartphone owners have used their phone in the past year to look up information about a health condition. 57% have used their phone to do online banking. So this isn't just using phones for fun. It's also thinking about how do we navigate our lives. And then if you want to advance to that next slide for me, please. Let's think about so we have our applications, we have our potential volunteers, and they understand why they want to join. This isn't a one and done. We want to point out that recruitment is a cycle. It's not a race to the finish line. And it's okay if you have to ask a few times. Something we've done in years past is challenge your friends' board members to collect as many no's as possible. What happens if you reach out to 5 potential volunteers and you get 2 rock stars? Focus in on those 2 rock stars, not the fact that you heard no 3 times. Take away the scariness of reaching out by making it a group challenge, by practicing with each other, and by having a mission or an elevator speech. Simply put, if I ran into you at the grocery store and we socially distanced, had a quick conversation, and I asked, so I heard you're involved with the Friends, tell me a little bit about this. What are you going to do so that you keep my attention, you pique my interest as a potential member, and you stay true to your organization's mission? Just think about what 3 sentences define your work. I volunteer with the Friends because X makes Y impact. We also encourage you to create a pipeline of potential leadership opportunities for retention as well. It might be scary to reach out to somebody and say, we need a president next year. Can you be that person? But if you reach out to somebody and say, we're looking to start a new task force, will you join and learn a little bit more about our organization and how we help the library? This person will have an in, and this person might feel a little bit more comfortable when that next leadership role comes up. We really like the idea of task forces and one-off projects to keep that momentum going and to help folks who might not be able to fit a traditional board meeting in busy schedules. Think about what are your goals when you're trying to come up with these task forces, because again, we don't want busy work. If there's a specific project or need in your community, for instance, how can my organization become more family friendly? How can my organization reach more rural members? This might be a good opportunity for just a quick investigatory task force. We would also like to encourage you to think about the balance of social versus traditional print media. Although I might be more likely to respond to something on a tweet, it's still important to think about your traditional print media if you can do a letters to the editor. We've heard from some friends groups who have a weekly column in their local newspaper highlighting different opportunities within their community, as well as book recommendations. You volunteer because it's fun. Make sure that that fun shares.
Thank you, Madeline. So I wanted to take a moment to talk about mentorship, the mentorship mindset, because that can be a really integral part of understanding the culture of both the library and its board. And it can be really important to retention and also to making everyone feel heard and valued. So pairing a veteran board member with a new recruit is not just an incredibly effective way of integrating new members. It's a relationship that's really ripe with opportunities for the mentor, the mentee, and for the friends group at large. It's a two-way street. So think about it. New recruits have the advantage of not knowing the nuances of your particular group, and that can be a really great opportunity for constructive conversations and maybe some reassessment of practices, processes that have just sort of become a second nature for veteran members. Every library is different, and so are the friends groups that support them. So you can serve as a trusted guide throughout that navigation process. The mentoring relationship also helps avoid creating an old guard and a new guard because everyone is invested in the growth of the group and in nurturing each other. So if everyone can answer the question, what's in this for me? You'll have greater buy-in from everyone, regardless of age or tenure. Being the newest addition to an established group can be really intimidating, and if not approached through the lens of mentorship, it can be really disheartening. And this is especially true if generational gaps exist within that group. So you can encourage that mentoring mindset by integrating mentoring systems into the onboarding process. We have a whole section on mentoring in our book, and that includes ready to implement activities, worksheets, and conversation starters. Because mentors can offer a lot to their mentees, including perspective, trust, accountability. If you provide a framework for your mentors and your mentees, this can really help jumpstart the process while also ensuring it doesn't fall by the wayside. So maybe create a set of worksheets or use a set that's been created already, like ours. Use that for that pair to use at intervals throughout the year, maybe at 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months into service. We suggest a worksheet that's specifically for the mentor and then another one for the mentee. And these worksheets can really guide conversation, but also serve as a reminder that this relationship is a two-way street. They might include a walkthrough or maybe a virtual orientation to the library's website and social media presence, and maybe an orientation to the Friends group as well. It could include an overview of the bylaws or procedures of the Friends group, as well as an introduction to all the members. Maybe some mentor process questions like, what did you discuss during your last meeting with your mentee? What's happened since? What needs to be done for your mentee to take on this next project or problem with confidence? Some mentee process questions might look like, what is a problem you need help with? What challenges are you facing? What's one accomplishment you can share with your mentor? So both mentor and mentee should be able to articulate what was discussed at each meeting, what was learned, what will be accomplished by the next meeting. And also don't forget that this should also be fun. Other questions to encourage your mentors and mentees to ask are, what's something I learned about my mentee today? Or what's something my mentor is really excited about this year? Because that will also establish your individual place in the Friends group. Again, finding out really unique things about each person avoids that persona mentality. One more thing to keep in mind is that the mentoring mindset doesn't have to start when someone's recruited. Like Madeline mentioned, one way to do that is to create a pipeline of service and to think of other ways to engage volunteers. So the ask to serve can be a really pressurized situation. It's an honor to be asked, but service really does require a lot of time and energy. So like Madeline said, give potential members some other options when it comes to serving. This way they can feel comfortable easing into it and not feel like it's a now or never situation. And create more opportunities for entry. As you ask for event or fundraiser volunteers, why not think of them as potential future friends? Involve them in conversations, introduce them to what service looks like, give them the opportunity to be invested and interested in service beyond that single interaction. Ideally, serving in a friends group or serving on a board doesn't need to be the first ask for folks. Work towards that pipeline. It could take a lot of different forms. So an example could be, do you have a teen liaison or maybe even a teen friends group? Another example, creating task forces around issues that motivate community members with one representative from your friends group and various community members. Another example, hold fireside chats, not official meetings and not exclusive to current friends. Just chat about the library, the community, needs, etc. Finally, take every opportunity to brag about your library and your friends group. The more folks hear about your work at events, on social media, through newsletters, in webinars, the more familiar they'll be and the more comfortable and excited they'll be ultimately to volunteer. On the subject of bragging, we wanted to share a tangible activity with you to take back to your groups, something we have called the Friends Brag. So like an elevator pitch, this exercise allows you to boil down all the great things you do into some tangible moments you can capture and share. So the way this activity can work is in column 1, maybe some tangible wins that your friends group or your board can claim. So like Madeline said, maybe that's new equipment, maybe it's collection development. And then in column 2, who might be interested in hearing about these wins? That could be families, could be young professionals, it could be other community groups. And then column 3, how could you best advertise this win to this particular group of people? So that could be story times, as we've said. That's clearly one of our favorite ways to engage. But it could be webinars, maybe a note at the beginning of a library-sponsored webinar. Thanks to our friends for allowing this service for our community, something like that. It could be in social media posts. And these are some of the brags, some examples of friends brags that I thought of. So maybe a community garden outside the library, maybe that was a friends project. Who might be interested in that? Families, home gardeners, maybe even local restaurants, local garden clubs, conservation organizations. And then the ways that we could advertise this. So it could look like bookmarks in gardening books. Maybe if it's an audio book or a virtual book, maybe a note in the listing in your catalog. This was brought to you by the Friends group, or check out our community garden. It could be a physical sign in the garden. It could be social media posts, maybe a virtual tour of the garden, or offering food from the garden for the community. Another example, new children's room equipment. Who would be interested in this? Definitely families and caregivers, but maybe even educators in the community, daycares, day camps. You can mention this at story time. Put pamphlets in circulating kits. If you're doing go-to bags, or if you're doing grab bags with programming materials or activities for families, put a note in there. Thanks to the Friends group. Or maybe social media posts in conjunction with children's programming that is likely being pushed out on social media. So we've talked about thinking outside the box a lot today. And like I said, we wanted to give you some tangible things to take back to your friends group. So during our research, we've encountered a ton of great creative ways to engage folks through advocacy and fundraising opportunities. So we wanted to share some of those here to give you some fodder for your own groups. First, take a look at the picture on the top left. Now, some folks might pay money to avoid being outside on a lake on a freezing February night, but that's not the case in Washburn, Wisconsin, where an annual 10-kilometer ski and snowshoe race across Lake Superior across the Chequamegon Bay attracts thousands of racers and spectators every year. This is called Book Across the Bay, and it was started in 1996 as a joint fundraiser for the Washburn Public Library and the Tri-County Medical Society. The race begins in Ashland, and it's lit by over 1,000 luminaries. A local resident explained that the buzz starts well over a month before it happens. You can just feel the pride in the community. What I love about this as well is that it was a joint fundraiser between the public library and the medical society. So think about other organizations that you might be able to partner with for these fundraising events. Look at the lower left image. You might recognize one of those designs from a children's book. This was a flash tattoo sheet from an event at the Lawrence Public Library in Lawrence, Kansas. And for National Library Week in 2019, the Library Foundation partnered with a tattoo shop for a tattoo fundraiser in town. Tattoo artists created about 8 flash tattoos for the event. The one-day fundraiser generated about $4,000, and it attracted a lot of folks who might not be as excited about a more traditional book sale fundraiser and might come to this instead. So this is another way of thinking outside the box and also involving local organizations and local companies that might also benefit from some new folks. So a lot has changed since those 2 fundraisers last took place. We are probably not able as often to meet in person, probably not do tattoo fundraisers right now. So the images on the right are 2 virtual events that I wanted to highlight. The flyer in the top right advertises an opportunity to engage with other readers during what the LA Public Library calls a Stay Home and Read Book Ball, which is an event that benefits library programming. It encourages folks to stay home, read a book, and share on social media to bring attention to the library and also raise funds. They call it their coziest non-event of the year, which I loved. This is a really well-attended and pretty popular event. If you look at the website, you'll see celebrity endorsements, lots of really well-known faces talking about how wonderful this event is. So virtual events can bring together a really diverse and exciting group of people. And the graphic on the lower right is for the Pittsburgh Promenade, which is a fundraiser for Achieva, the group that I am a trustee for. So it just happened this past weekend. They normally have a big annual promenade fundraiser that attracts a ton of people, raises a bunch of money. Of course, we weren't able to do that this year, but instead, we used a virtual platform to hold the event. We had a silent auction, and then we offered food and drink recipes to everyone so that we could all participate from afar. It was really successful and a really fun twist on a long-standing tradition. So these are just a few ideas of non-traditional or adaptive fundraisers. So this could be a great way to not only attract new donors, but also new friends.
Thank you so much, Tess. And as a former resident of Wisconsin, I would love to invite you all back up for Book Across the Bay as soon as it's safe to do so. There is nothing like watching 10,000 skiers and snowshoers clomp in joyfully to a small rural town and to celebrate the outdoors and great reads. So we wanted to think about a few last takeaways. Enlist your full community and really equip your advocates when it comes to letting folks know about the opportunities of the Friends group as well as the great work that you do. So let's keep picking on that story time example. If you want to be the person to stand up in front of a crowd full of toddlers, all the power to you. That being said, your library staff has trained experts in childhood development and early literacy, and they're already beloved and trusted by the caregivers in the community. Why not give them a script? Why not say, here are the 5 goals we're working on? Or even better yet, here are the 2 things that you can see in their room right now that we have touched. Empower your volunteers. When you have a fantastic community volunteer, there's nothing more frustrating than hearing, please apply back in 2 years. Or, I don't need a fundraiser right now, but if you want to work on database management, that's fantastic. So we want to encourage you to think beyond the current roles that your organization might have. And do you know what? It's totally okay if your potential volunteers aren't current library users. These library convert stories actually speak volumes about the power of your organization. And as Tess mentioned with the mentorship slide, it can be a great opportunity to have fresh eyes not only to the Friends group, but also the library world as a whole. Explain your work. Think about that job description as you would explain it to a 5-year-old. What's the point of a book sale? Oh, it's to get books out there in the hands of the community, and it's to raise money so that we can buy more cool stuff. Who wouldn't want to get involved with that? And then engage with your library wins. The library works because of you. The library community is able to reach higher and dream bigger thanks to your additional not only financial support, but also your roles as champions and advocates within the community. So own those wins, celebrate those wins. And it's okay if we take a look and say, with whom are we partnering to create these wins? As Tess mentioned, we do have a book written with our co-authors, Lina Bertinelli and Kathy Kosinski. And so if you're interested, it might be available at your local library. Otherwise, it is at the ALA store as well. Tess and I, before we turn to questions, really want to, again, thank you sincerely and dearly for spending this time with us today, this afternoon, as well as for the work that you're doing for your community. Community leadership, as we said, it's a cycle. It's not a one and done process. And so thank you for taking the time for continuing education, learning with our peers, and learning about what we can do to be better together. So at this point, we'd really love to open it up with some questions to learn more about your community and how we can better help.
If you want to read more, we have some of our resources that we referred to in there as well. Yeah, feel free to ask any questions you have. Thanks again for joining us today.